Well, hello and welcome back to episode 21 titled Booze and Drugs Are Okay, but Take Note. The office and the last day of employment in New York City are, well, really working from home during the pandemic. Over the cascading decades, I've come to discover that the use of alcohol and drugs can mitigate the mishaps and discomfort of everyday life by creating the illusion of comfort and balance. And it also teaches that perhaps the line between reality and fantasy is more narrow than we realize. But please note to my fellow passengers of life, use them sparingly and wisely. Enjoy the ride and avoid going over that cliff. Rating TV shows is not an easy endeavor. I struggle to find an estimate of the actual number of different TV programs that have aired in television's 70 plus year history. And as I enjoy rating and evaluating things and voicing my ineffectual opinions, I consider The Office, which appeared on NBC from 2005 to 2013, to be one of the best, if not the best, TV shows ever. The humor in the show is rather obvious. Its kookiness, unpredictability, and cast of quirky and eccentric characters was plain to see. The producers, writers, and directors, along with their supremely marvelous cast, worked up a magic elixir with the show. The Office at their forefront portrayed the foibles of humanity as well as any program that I've ever watched. Beyond the bizarre behavior and unusually deranged moments of the show, there was almost always a very humane grasp of the complexities of everyday life. That when either Michael or Kevin or Dwight would go down the road of insanity, they would somehow return home to this family, as they called it, and would not hold grudges, for the most part. After all, this was just a TV show, and would apologize for their faults. Not only was the writing quite clever, off the wall, and versatile in covering a wide swath of topics, the cast was spectacular and diverse. Over the 9 seasons, they carried about 40 different characters, including Steve Carell, Rainn Wilson, John Krasinski, Ed Helms, Mindy Kaling, David Koechner, Jenna Fisher, Will Ferrell, Craig Robinson, Charles Miner, James Spader, Ray Romano, Jim Carrey, and Kathy Bates, to name a few. And as always, some shows are more entertaining than others, but for the 201 shows they aired, I was impressed with how many of them were funny, creative, heartwarming, and clever. The progression of Jim and Pam's growing love, inside jokes and pranks, the ridiculous backwood antics of the Dutch Pennsylvania farmer Dwight Schrute, Michael Scott's constant inane, absurd, and naive behavior, along with the misleading soliloquies and the that's what she said comments to the camera, which he did all the time, the lewd and lascivious behavior of Meredith, the childlike simplicity of Kevin, the competitive banter between Angela and Phyllis, the hallucinations and total detachment from reality of Creed, the on and off relationships of self centered and shallow Ryan, with the hysterical and immature ups and downs of the emotional Kelly, the ridiculous old money jet setting, naive, and insecure personality of Andy, the quiet, unassuming, lonely, and impish Toby, who Michael detests throughout the show for some reason, and the direct and penetrating Daryl, and the goofy, airheaded but lovable Aaron, and the intense, off-center, and brilliant Robert California, possibly one of my favorite sitcom characters in TV history, who once replied to Andy's affront, "Well, I will not be blackmailed by some ineffectual, privileged, effete, soft penis debutante." The ever distant and disgruntled Stanley. I can continue on, but I'm sure you get the point. They all and more contributed to an extraordinary multitude of relatable, lovable, and joyful scenarios. And at the risk of sounding elementary, I would be surprised and disappointed if someone didn't find something quite relatable and delightfully humorous about the show and the characters they played. I still find myself watching shows or portions of episodes that I've seen before at least once or twice, pulling me into the orbit of the charm and humor of the show, despite knowing what's going to transpire. Another edge that I give the show is a quantitative edge. 201 episodes, of which I would estimate that 85 to 90% of the episodes are of high quality, and to have cycled through as many characters as they did and maintain the humor and standard of the show is remarkable. You can't beat both high quality and quantity. And Jim and Pam's relationship was a minor masterpiece to me. Don't know of many shows that handle this relationship in such an interesting and charming manner. The ups and downs, twists and turns, the love that seemed so genuine that you couldn't help feeling that they were actually deeply in love. The hilarious competitive interactions between Dwight and Jim always left me laughing or smiling. The both of them would antagonize each other relentlessly. But through it all, they stayed connected, helping each other when the need was there, though begrudgingly at times. Michael Scott's management style was childlike, erratic at best, unpredictable, manic, and just wrong. I don't think I ever saw him do a stitch of work, and his psychotic berating of Toby was an odd portrayal in the context of the show. You almost hated him for it. He was judgmental and sometimes unfair, but somehow, in a strange manner, he appreciated the people he worked with and could be emotional and sweet with his underlings. And if they somehow had turned Michael into a rational manager, the show would not have been the same. The assortment of other lunatics meshed with him in a bizarre, almost absurd fashion. They were all deranged, and the repartee between all of them was, in the words of the masters of British humor, very silly. It's no wonder that the show is an adaptation of a British comedy of the same name, created by Ricky Gervais and Steve Merchant. Not everyone on the show was a lunatic, but both Jim and Pam were the normal ones, yet both of them were quite funny in their own right, despite being the more solid and grounded characters. Jim was known for his long, baffling looks into the camera, as one of the quirky cast members would come out with some outlandish comment or situation, which was, I would guess, about 3 minutes, every 3 minutes of the typical show. Through it all, the cast of the characters, no matter what pesky circumstances abound, usually came together to aid their office mates when they needed it most. Because there were many layers and tricks and turns in their predicaments, and one of the stalwart features of the show was its capriciousness, it kept you on your toes. Dwight, Michael, Kevin, Ryan, and Kelly were masters of whimsy, to name a few, as every cast member could be unpredictable. It was simply one of the finest TV shows ever, entertaining, clever, comical, and most of all, highly relatable. And on April 14th, 2020, after 29 years of employment with A4 Media, one of the many subdivisions of what was originally Cablevision Systems Corp., and various other entities within that company, which was eventually purchased by Altice NV, a French telecom conglomerate, in 2015, my career came to an end. I was employed by a media buying entity in New York City for about 4.5 years prior to working with Cablevision, which added up to 34 years being employed in the city. It had to end eventually, and I'll never forget those years in New York City. It was naturally, as the Grateful Dead famously coined, a long, strange trip. And of course, I have a shipload, and that is ship, not shitload, of wonderful memories and lovely, unforgettable people that I worked with. But c'est la vie, and since it happened about 2 hours ago when I wrote this back in 2020, it hasn't hit me yet. But I'm sure it will over the next few days. And I may have spent more time there than I did anywhere else in my life. The odds of that changing going forward is nil. And I will stop here.